This is the best book with which to start study of Thucydides and the Peloponnesian War, says Donald Kagan, author of On the Origins of War and Pericles of Athens. Can't go wrong. I have not read Mr. Kagan, but he highly recommends this book. What is it, this book, you ask? The Landmark Thucydides. Who is this guy? 5th century BC, before the Common Era, a historian who took place in and experienced the Peloponnesian War, which was a 20 or so odd year war between ancient Athens and ancient Sparta. I'm sure anybody who's watching this, who sees this, is going to know Sparta probably from the movie 300. Um, this is Sparta, kick a guy down the well, that whole thing. Athens is the supposed birthplace of democracy as we know it. Um, they were quite proud of that. Thucydides was an Athenian, and he wrote what is considered to be the definitive history of the Peloponnesian War. Now, I was looking for something to read because if you've seen my other playlist that I'm doing at the same time I'm starting this one, that is Roman, Suetonius's The 12 Caesars, because I'm taking Latin class through Helen McVeigh's Classics Academy. And I'm also, the beginning of 2024, I started taking ancient Greek. And I was looking for someone Greek to read. Like, who do you recommend? My Greek teacher recommended Thucydides. That's our guy. So, Carrie, if you happen to catch this video one day, thank you very much. I got the Landmark Thucydides. This is the book she recommended. A book that has not just Thucydides' writings, but also maps of the entire area that the war took place in, annotations. It has an entire encyclopedic index. This is a big boy, and appendices. So this is more than just what he wrote. You got pictures, maps, illustrations, indexes of the time, everything. What 5th century BC and Sparta were like. I have, just like with Suetonius, the 12 Caesars, I cracked that book open. I never read a word of it. I read so many paragraphs at a time. And in between each paragraph, I just give random me thoughts. Guy who's blue collar, who is not an academic. Just a guy who's been taking classics later in life at middle age because I tried it in high school and I've had classicists friends who inspired me and encouraged me to get back on it after decades. But I've never read the works. And I'm really happy. I want to get into this. So I have never read any of this. I don't know what it's going to say. I don't know how it's going to start. I'm going to crack past these pages that talk about Thucydides himself, the veracity of how much of his writings are real or not. I'm going to treat this just like Suetonius. I'm just going to read it. I'm not going to believe it or disbelieve it. Just going to give my random thoughts on it. Hopefully, you'll join me along for this ride. Every video, I'll stick this in a separate playlist and call it Blue Collar Athens or Attica, something like that. Maybe even just Blue Collar Thucydides, who knows. But I'm just going to start this off, the first paragraph, read a couple, stop every now and then, and sum it up a little bit, and we'll just take it from there. So, without any further ado, let's find out what this guy from the 5th century BC had to say about a war I don't know anything about except for the two states that were involved in it. Thucydides, an Athenian, wrote the history of the war between the Peloponnesians and the Athenians, beginning at the moment that it broke out, and believing that it would be a great war and more worthy of relation than any that had preceded it. Okay, I'm not even going to wait till the end of the paragraph. He doesn't climb small mountains. This belief was not without its grounds. The preparations of both the combatants were in every department in the last state of perfection. Okay, and he could see the rest of the Hellenic race taking sides in the quarrel. Those who delayed doing so at once having it in contemplation. Indeed, this was the greatest movement yet known in history, not only of the Hellenes, but of a large part of the barbarian world. I had almost said of mankind. Well, at least he cut himself short. For though the events of remote antiquity, and even those that more immediately precede the war, could not from lapse of time be clearly ascertained, yet the evidences which an inquiry carried as far back as was practicable lead me to trust all point to the conclusion that there was nothing on a greater scale, either in war or in other matters. All right. Well, there you go. First person accounts speaking in third person and first person. Okay. Second paragraph. For instance, it is evident that the country now called Hellas had in ancient times no settled population. On the contrary, migrations were of frequent occurrence, the several tribes readily abandoning their homes under the pressure of superior numbers. Without commerce, without freedom of communication either by land or sea, cultivating no more of their territory than the necessities of life required, destitute of capital, never planting their land, for they could not tell when an invader might not come and take it all away, and when he did come, they had no walls to stop him. Thinking that the necessities of daily sustenance could be supplied at one place as well as another, they cared little about shifting their habitation, and consequently neither built large cities nor attained to any other form of greatness. The richest soils were always most subject to this change of masters, such as the district now called Thessaly, Boeotia, most of the Peloponnesus, Arcadia excepted. Of course, Arcadia, you've got to accept it. I don't know, I'm just joking. And the most fertile parts of the rest of Hellas. The goodness of the land favored the enrichment of particular individuals, and thus created faction which proved a fertile source of ruin. It also invited invasion. Accordingly, Attica, from the poverty of its soil enjoying from a very remote period freedom from faction, never changed its inhabitants. And here is no minor example of my assertion that the migrations were the cause of there being no corresponding growth in other parts. The most powerful victims of war or faction from the rest of Hellas took refuge with the Athenians as a safe retreat, and at an early period, becoming naturalized, swelled the already large population of the city to such a height that Attica became at last too small to hold them, and they had to send out colonies to Ionia. Interesting. And Attica is a small, almost peninsula looking strut of land at the end of Greece. And then it's like a little strip of land that goes off to the west of it and then blows up into the Peloponnesus. It's very interesting looking piece. Greece is really interesting in how it looks. It's like a whole bunch of little broken puzzle pieces. Um, and I did not know any of that before, and I'm now staring at this map and uh, going to add in a little bit of the Assassin's Creed Odyssey helps. So, third paragraph. There is also another circumstance that contributes not a little to my conviction of the weakness of ancient times. Darn those ancients. Before the Trojan War, there is no indication of any common action in Hellas, nor indeed of the universal prevalence of the name. On the contrary, before the time of Hellen, son of Deucalion, no such name existed, but the country went by the names of the different tribes, in particular of the Pelasgian. It was not till Hellen and his sons grew strong in Phthiotis and were invited as allies into the other cities, that one by one they gradually acquired from the connection the name of Hellenes, though a long time elapsed before that name could fasten itself upon all. The best proof of this is furnished by Homer. Born long after the Trojan War, he nowhere calls all of them by that name, nor indeed any of them except the followers of Achilles from Phthiotis, who were the original Hellenes. In his poems, they are called Danaans, Argives, and Achaeans. He does not even use the term barbarian, probably because the Hellenes had not yet been marked off from the rest of the world by one distinctive name. I admit that when I read the Iliad the first time, I had some confusion because he did drop Achaeans and Argives and Danaans, and I was sitting there for a while like, who are these people? I thought this was the Greeks first. Took a minute. It appears, therefore, that the several Hellenic communities, comprising not only those who first acquired the name, city by city, as they came to understand each other, but also those who assumed it afterwards as the name of the whole people, were before the Trojan War prevented by their want of strength and the absence of mutual intercourse from displaying any collective action. Indeed, They could not unite for this expedition until they had gained increased familiarity with the sea. So this will be the fourth paragraph. And the first person known to us by tradition as having established a navy is Minos. He made himself master of what is now called the Hellenic Sea and ruled over the Cyclades, into most of which he sent the first colonies, expelling the Carians and appointing his own sons governors, and thus did his best to put down piracy in those waters, a necessary step to secure revenues for his own use. Paragraph 5. And I think I'll stop after 6 for this intro. For in early times, the Hellenes and the barbarians of the coast and islands, as communication by sea became more common, were tempted to turn pirates, under the conduct of their most powerful men, the motives being to serve their own greed and to support the needy. They would fall upon a town unprotected by walls and consisting of a mere collection of villages, and would plunder it. Indeed, this came to be the main source of their livelihood, no disgrace being yet attached to such an achievement, but even some glory. An illustration of this is furnished by the honor with which some of the inhabitants of the continent still regard a successful marauder, and by the question we find the old poets everywhere representing the people as asking of voyagers, are they pirates? As if those who are asked the question would have no idea of disclaiming the imputation, or their interrogators of reproaching them for it. The same pillaging prevailed also on land, and this reminds me of in the 12 Caesars. Suetonius has stated that a younger Julius Caesar, once while traveling at sea, was kidnapped by pirates and held for ransom. And so you figure that's the first century BC. Thucydides is writing 5th century, so we're talking about a 400 or so year difference. Piracy is still rampant. Of course, we know way down the road, Vikings are still doing basically piracy. Piracy goes all the way into the 18th, 19th century today. And last, the short 6th paragraph. And even at the present day, many parts of Hellas still follow the old fashion amongst the Ozolian Locrians and the Aetolians, for instance, and the Acarnanians, and that region of the continent. And the custom of carrying arms is still kept up among these mainland peoples from the old piratical habits. So, we don't have the Peloponnesian War just yet, other than it's mentioned right away. But what we do have in this book, for me, is really good writer, hooked me right in. His third person, first person is kind of weird. That's like a thing they criticize nowadays, but it's ancient writing, so they had their own thing. But I'm already pulled in to what he has to say. And right off the bat, he stepped backward in time to give us the history of what we now call Greece, but what they called themselves the Hellenes or Hellenic peoples. And even before then, before they were the Hellenes, and where did that name come from? And what made them up? The little states that eventually had to come together. And apparently, since we have a war, that's foreshadowed. Um, that's going to come with trials and tribulations. So right away, I'm in. I'm all set for this book. I'm good. I'm glad. Um, I'm so glad that my teacher recommended this one. I didn't know what the first line was even going to be. Right off the bat, I feel like I've just plunged right into uh, a great work of historical fiction. The best part is that some or most of it is going to be true. So, with this, you and I, if you've never read this before, we're going to learn about the Peloponnesian War and Athens and Sparta. We're going to see what happened. We're going to lock it down. We're going to get educated. And we're going to turn ourselves into armchair classicists somewhere along the way. I hope you'll like this video. Hope you'll subscribe. You'll come back. If you know anything about Thucydides or the Peloponnesian War, if you catch this video, feel free to drop a comment because I'd love to learn more. Until then, I will see you all next time.